welcome back, and great to see that you found your way back after the game, and congratulations to the Dutch, and we're very sorry for the Australians, of course. We had, I think, a very interesting day today, partly because it was the first time that we had a gathering of people from different backgrounds and disciplines, but also different countries together. And I think we also had quite a lot of people who are actually whistleblowers today. So I think during the day in the program, I thought it must have been a sort of a warm bath for many of them to see that there are very many people involved in analyzing their future and the future of whistleblowing. My name is Teun Gautier. I'm with Free Press Unlimited, responsible for a team that's involved with journalistic initiatives. And we try to support and vitalize journalistic infrastructures in fragile and repressive states. And my team is mostly focusing on the Middle East and Northern Africa. And I'm also the chairman of Publieks, the Stichting Publieks, that introduced the whistleblowing platform Publieks in the Netherlands in September last year. And I'm very happy to help these four people have a discussion on the future of whistleblowing tonight. It's about 1 year ago that Snowden came out, and many of you will probably have read the book that Greenwald just published. And we thought that it might be interesting to take that anniversary to look back, partly, what happened in the last year and what were the consequences, what's the status at this moment, and thirdly, what's the future going to be like, and what would it take from us all to have an environment where whistleblowing can be a vital part of civil strength. Maybe before I introduce the four speakers and members of the panel, I'd like to share some news with you, which I think is extremely exciting. Publieks was launched on Global Leaks technology. I'm sure you're all familiar with that last year in September. And tomorrow it will be announced that Free Press Unlimited and Yves Eudes have joined forces to NGOs that are active also with human rights and press in the world, will introduce and launch an initiative to run Publieks in very many countries around the world. So take that concept and bring it to countries as Mexico, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Iraq, anywhere that we gain access to. So extremely happy to be able to work with Fabio and his team, and to work with Julia and Yves and great that Leon of Free Press Unlimited supports this as well. So great, well done. Very exciting project. Okay. We have four people taking part in this discussion, and I've asked them to introduce themselves primarily, and take 5 minutes to give a little insight in their background and also their perspective on whistleblowing and their role. But I'll introduce them briefly. I'll start with Yves Eudes. I'm sorry, Yves Eudes, excusez-moi. The French name. It's very hard to speak French when you're speaking English. Yves is. Yeah, I have a French name. Yeah, that's very old French, but. Yves is with Le Monde, a senior reporter in Le Monde, and has been very strongly involved. You were the lead in the WikiLeaks productions when that came out for Le Monde. Then we have Alison Glick, who is with the GAP in America, which is the Government Accountability Program, an organization that helps and supports whistleblowers around the world, or internationally as well, right? It is now, because Snowden is one of your clients as well that you're supporting. So we'd be very eager to learn more of that. We have Hans-Martin Tillack from the Stern magazine in Germany. You have a very strong background on reporting on European mishappenings and so forth, and you received several awards, if I understand, of your reporting on the European Union and things that go wrong there. So you're an investigative reporter. And finally, we have Garrett Robinson, who's the lead developer of SecureDrop, which is very similar to Global Leaks, and a whistleblowing platform that is being used now, at least by the New Yorker and Guardian, just introduced?
Yeah, 12 organizations.
12 already.
And the Guardian and the Washington Post were the most recent to announce.
Okay, cool. Cool. Okay, so Garrett, can I start with you? Could you take a couple of minutes to elaborate a little bit on what your background is and your perspective on technology in terms of whistleblowing?
Sure, yeah. It might take only 1 minute as opposed to a couple. Hi, everybody. So my name is Garrett, and I work for the Freedom of the Press Foundation. I'm the lead developer of SecureDrop, as he just said. I'll repeat him. So I am a computer security engineer. I work for Mozilla full-time, but when I was in college, I worked with activists in Appalachia, which is a region of America that is well known for its extraction industries, coal mining, mountaintop removal coal mining, natural gas, etc. And while I was there, I met a lot of people who were very concerned about surveillance and wiretapping. And it occurred to me then as a computer science student that there were tools, cryptography and such, that perhaps could be used to alleviate some of these concerns. So after I graduated, I worked with some friends on creating a platform called Honest Appalachia, which was a platform entirely designed to solicit leaks and information about Appalachia, and it was focused solely on the region and issues there. This was all in the immediate aftermath of WikiLeaks and all of that excitement. A few years passed, and most recently, a friend of mine asked me to work on SecureDrop, which was then taken over from the New Yorker and is now being operated by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. So we took the project, we kept developing it, we've taken feedback from all of the journalists who are using it now, and we have made several releases. The newest release will come out very, very soon, is currently being audited, and we now have 12 organizations that use SecureDrop. It's a different approach from Global Leaks, although basically it's very similar. So it has the basic approach is to say, you know, if we could provide a better system for people like Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning to use to communicate with journalists, what would it look like? So it's very paranoid, but we think that it has a lot of good properties as a result. And we mostly work on developing that and trying to bring it to more and more people. Our unofficial slogan is to put a WikiLeaks in every newsroom. So we want to bring these capabilities outside of their brand new and unusual environments and bring them to everybody so we can empower whistleblowers, sources, and journalists all over the world.
Okay, thanks. And The Guardian just launched last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago. Can you elaborate a little bit on why it took them so long to involve that type of technology into their newsroom and what their main considerations were to adopt it?
Sure. I think the considerations are mostly that it's kind of a hot topic now, and I think a lot of journalists realize the potential in receiving information. You know, people are famously hungry for information, for sources, for scoops, and this system is a little bit safer than just soliciting it via email or calling someone on the phone. We have a waiting list now of about 30 to 40 organizations who are also going to get SecureDrop. So part of the problem is just us going out and helping them with the installation and with the training and so on. I think with The Guardian and also with the Washington Post, there were challenges in integrating it with their existing system, which is very complex and has its own requirements. And we also have a lot of very stringent guidelines as to how it can be implemented. It has to use TLS for all the connections, and we're trying to get all the papers to actually use that universally across their sites with mixed degrees of success. And the whole protocol is, I think, a little bit more involved and complicated than some people are used to, but we believe that is necessary for security. So that's the reason why it took a little while.
Okay, all right, thanks. Hans-Martin, could you take us through your perspectives on whistleblowing as an investigative reporter?
Yes. Thanks for inviting me first. And of course, I'm an investigative reporter now in Berlin, in Germany, and covering German politics. And in the years I've been doing this, I've very often benefited of the help of whistleblowers and have to be grateful for this help I got. But on the other hand, of course, in my years in Brussels, as you mentioned it, I also saw the downside, the dangers which are there for whistleblowers when they turn to journalists, because I had at several occasions received leaked documents from the EU Commission, the EU Anti-Fraud Office especially, and the Commission was anxious to stop this leaking, and then they finally, after some years, they were pushing the Belgian police to raid my office and flat in Brussels and to find out who were behind these leaks. And they took away nearly all of my documents, like 17 boxes with documents and laptop, mobile phones, etc. I, of course, was from the beginning protesting against this move because I said it's illegal, it's against protection of sources, which is guaranteed by the European Court of Human Rights. The police didn't listen. It ended with them taking away my stuff. We went to court afterwards immediately in Belgium, also against the EU Commission, and after 3 years won then at the European Court of Human Rights, because the European Court of Human Rights said that the principle of freedom of the press also means that sources have to be protected. Luckily, the sources they were looking for were not being found. I had been careful. I had not left any information on those who had given me documents and information. But of course, I might have been unlucky. I might have made a mistake, and then it would have been too late. Even when you've been in court after 3 years, the damage has been done. And so I can very well understand that whistleblowers think twice before they turn to journalists. You all know today that thanks to the revelations also of Edward Snowden, we have nowadays surveillance, which is nearly global and cannot really protect electronic ways of communication. On the other hand, of course, it's also true that as well as journalists benefit from the help of whistleblowers. Whistleblowers also need journalists because they need journalists in order to raise awareness for the problems they have seen at their workplace. And so they can turn to journalists in order to get public attention and therefore prevent further retaliation against them in their offices, in their organizations. So it's a relationship which is can be mutually beneficial, but there are dangers if there is no adequate protection of sources and if journalists make mistakes by tweeting the documents and information they get, and that's I would say, a struggle which will never end because states and governments will continue to try to find out about leaks and about sources, and journalists have to mobilize also the public from time to time, as whistleblowers have to defend their cases in order to make sure that journalists and whistleblowers can fulfill their jobs.
What do you think would have happened if they would have found the sources in your information? What did you have discussions about?
It would have been dangerous for the persons concerned, obviously, for their career, for everything, and it would also have been devastating for my career because people would have said, "What is this guy like? He cannot protect those people who are informing him." And there was one quite revealing moment when I was talking to one of the police officers, Belgian police officers there in 2004, and he told me, "Mr. Tillack, why don't you just tell us the name of these people? Then you can walk away happily and we leave you alone." And I said, "Hey, what is this like? How could I then do my work if I can't protect these people?" And then he answered, "Okay, but you can still contact press offices and write on basis of press releases, And I had apparently some difficulties explaining him that journalism should be should be much more than just covering and copying press releases.
Okay, thanks. It's a good thing that he chose to be a policeman and not a journalist, this guy.
Right.
Alison, would you take us through your work at GAP?
Sure. My name is Alison Glick, and yes, I'm with the Government Accountability Project, which is the U.S.'s leading corporate and government whistleblower advocacy and support organization. But GAP is also a founding member of the Whistleblowing International Network, which is also a co-sponsor of the conference, which is a coalition of international NGOs working in the field of whistleblower support. And in terms of how I came to this work as in the international program at GAP, I have a background as a human rights worker in the Middle East as well as a writer. So to me, to gravitate to this work seems somewhat natural. But in terms of how we see the role of whistleblowing, both I think within WIN and also within GAP, it's really as a democratic accountability mechanism. Of course, mainly through dealing with the issues of freedom of speech, but it's also, as been said earlier by Annie and Anna, it is one of the last lines of defense for citizens to keep the government and the public sphere safe. Because at least in the United States, we've seen over the past 30 or 40 years deregulation, we've seen unions being broken up, we've seen the privatization of the public sector. So where does the public have to go to ensure public safety and public well-being? Because of that process of the degradation of public welfare mechanisms, we're in the position of being forced to turn to whistleblowers. So the organizations that I'm part of work in defense and support of those individuals.
And what are the means? Snowden is one of your clients.
Yes, we're
right?
part of Snowden's legal team.
Okay. What are your means to support? I mean, he's a big whistleblower, of course, but what are your means to help and support people in that situation?
The way that GAP works is essentially 4 pillars, where we have lawyers, we're a law firm. So we support whistleblowers both in terms of litigation as well as defending them. We support them in the court of public opinion, you might say. So obviously we're talking about the role of journalism and the media in terms of whistleblowing. So it's often up to advocates working with whistleblowers in this sphere to also be part of that discussion, if you will. We have different program areas that highlight different types of whistleblowing, both national security and human rights, of course, which is where our representation of Snowden comes in. We have a food integrity program. We have an international program that also focuses on international institutions. I think in the last session, someone talked about the UN tribunals and some of the UN decisions that are in the process of being made. So we look at international institutions themselves and the accountability or lack of accountability mechanisms that exist there. So it's sort of like an all-prong approach to whistleblowing support.
And how are you financed? Silly question, but
not
irrelevant.
a silly question at all. Not by the government. We're financed primarily through foundations and individual donations.
Okay, good. Yves, could you take us through your experiences with this type of very heavy information that you worked on the WikiLeaks file and your perspective on whistleblowing in the newsroom?
Okay, so I'm a roving reporter, so I've been covering all sorts of stories, high tech, low tech. But I've been invited here because I was in charge of the WikiLeaks operation for Le Monde. And so I had a really in-depth knowledge of how this whole thing happened, except that I talked about it twice today for 2 hours, so maybe it's time to move on. And I wanted to say something more about trying to lose the big picture for a minute and really focus on narrowly on the media perspective. See, if you look at what happened with WikiLeaks and with the Edward Snowden stories, on the surface it looks like the media there was a very positive experiences for the media. They got the files, they got the story, they worked hard, they spread the news worldwide, their sales increased, they got the fame, the glory, book deals, and so on and so forth. So it was all perfect on the surface. If you look a little deeper, you realize that there is some worrisome trends. It's coming. The new generation of whistleblowers. So Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden have one thing in common. They were born in the 80s. They're the internet generation, and obviously they do not trust the old media. They have to work with them because the old media still have the resources, the brand, and the audiences. But basically, they fear that the big media will either kill the story, which is not likely, but that they will publish only parts of it, the least controversial parts, that they will negotiate with the government what can and cannot be published when we're talking about highly sensitive matters like national security and all that. So having this conversation between big media and the government has become completely standard practice, widely accepted in the profession. But I've noticed that the younger whistleblowers, they question the validity of this whole law. It's not a law. It's not written anywhere. The media don't have to do that. And when we ask why we do it, sometimes it's difficult to give a proper answer. So in other words, you could say that these younger whistleblowers are afraid that the big media themselves would impose some sort of censorship on their story, and that's very troublesome. In 2010, Manning decided. He gave all his documents to Julian Assange, who was an internet activist that nobody knew at the time. He was completely unknown. And Manning himself or herself knew nothing about that man. In an email that he sent to a friend, Manning said he called Assange a crazy white-haired Aussie, Aussie meaning from Australia. So to him, obviously, it was better to send all his treasure to an unknown crazy guy with very limited means that no one knew about, rather than send it to the New York Times or CNN, because that's what people did in the previous generation, with the Pentagon Papers or the Watergate and so on. And Manning hasn't changed her views. Just a few days ago, she wrote her first prison article, which published in the New York Times first, and she addresses what she thinks remains a very basic unsolved problem. Quote, how the United States military controlled the media coverage of its involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. So then Manning goes on to blame the US government for manipulating the media, but he also clearly blames the media for being so easy to manipulate. And so one notch. Now, in the case of WikiLeaks, it wasn't like the clear situation where you had one whistleblower and then one media. You had a middleman, a new guy, Julian Assange, with his own working method, his own ethics, his own ambitions, his own agenda. So, instead of a couple, suddenly we had a ménage à trois, and as you know, it's much harder. I don't know, if somebody it's not as easy to deal with. Like the British say, two's company, three's a crowd, right? So you got a little crowded at times. And obviously, Julian Assange realized that he needed to work with traditional media. He came to us, but over time he became more and more critical and distrustful of the established media. He had a bad quarrel with The Guardian. Then the New York Times said he's not a partner, he's a source. And then that soured the relations with all media eventually. And now this pattern is repeating itself. For exactly the same reason, Edward Snowden explicitly rejected the idea that he could give his documents directly to a big media. In an interview he gave in August last year, once he was settled in Russia, he explains why. He says, after 9/11, many of the most important news outlets in America abdicated their role as a check to power for fear of being seen as an unpatriotic and being punished in the market during a period of heightened nationalism. And then he goes on, from a business perspective, this was the obvious strategy. So again, just like Manning, Edward Snowden chose to give his documents to two people who were journalists, but he chose these two persons because he admired the quality of their journalistic work as individuals and not for the news organizations they worked for. Because Glenn Greenwald is a freelance reporter, and he became famous thanks to a personal blog on surveillance issues and also on criticizing big media. And he had been an independent columnist for The Guardian for just 9 months, and he was not staff.
Yep.
So he had much more freedom, much more leeway than a staff reporter like myself, for instance. And the same for Laura Poitras, who's a fiercely independent documentary filmmaker. And she had run into trouble with the US government many times because of her work. So really,
that is your profession being criticized. Do you recognize the criticism?
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm saying it's a worrisome trend. And then Glenn Greenwald, if you mentioned his book, well, half of his book is criticizing the people he worked with, The Guardian, and so on and so forth. And he's clearly he understands the need to work with big media, but it's something that seems to be painful. That costs him, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks. Okay. After this introduction, we had an idea. Maybe we can have the next slide. To divide the hour that we still have into 3 parts. One is looking back at last year. Second is looking at the current situation, trying to analyze that. And the third part is looking forward. And we've designed a couple of questions, which are not strict. But I thought it may be fun to project them so the audience can collaborate and anticipate on the discussion. These are the questions or the topics that I'd like to touch upon with the group of 4 and with you as well. If you have any questions or suggestions, please interrupt. But the idea is that the big question round is after we sort of touch on these questions. It's difficult for you to see the questions. There's a big, and I know one answer, which is going to be short and powerful, but can we trust, basically the people have mandated governments with power. And the big question is, can we still trust our states and governments with the power that we've mandated them with? Garrett?
No.
Is there anyone here who believes...
Next question.
Yeah.
No, to answer a little more in detail, I think at least from the American perspective, if you look at Michael Hayden or James Clapper and the statements that they give before Congress, where they are theoretically obligated to give a reasonable response, when they blatantly lie to the body that is meant to keep them in check and communicate the wishes of the people to the government, then it makes it really hard to trust anything they do when they will blatantly lie in front of the government.
Okay. Alison?
I certainly don't disagree. But I think that, just to rephrase it or to answer it in a slightly different way, I think the important thing we have to keep in mind is how do we hold our governments and institutions accountable? Whether that means you trust them or don't trust them, frankly, I think we do all sort of know the answer to that question. It's about how do we have mechanisms in place to keep them accountable, because that's the closest we're going to get to trust. And I think that the way we do that is by having strong civil society organizations, by having a responsible, free, and independent press, because we know that the combination of secrecy and money, which is what, at least in the United States, money drives everything. That combination inevitably leads to corruption and abuse of power. So it's having mechanisms of accountability broadly defined in place that's going to get us the closest thing we can get to trust.
Okay. And Hans-Martin, is the press, is journalism, I'm sorry, take all your time to applaud. I'm sorry. Hans-Martin, is the press a vital force in that sphere?
Of course, that's one of our main roles, and as Alison said, I couldn't agree more to it. You should never blindly trust any institution, any government, wherever, not in the US and nowhere else, because inside any organizations, either deliberately or by accident, things go wrong. And then afterwards, one might then deliberately try to cover it up. And there the problem starts at the latest. And of course, you need then, among others, journalists, and of course, with the help of whistleblowers, to uncover what is going wrong there. And this is a extremely important role the press has to play. And the worrying thing, of course, is that we might be less able to do this job than in the past, because in the Western world at least, I think all major news organizations face the problem of sinking revenues from advertising, from sales, and this means, of course, then also less money for investigation. And of course, Yves is right. Anyway, there is already some distrust among younger people, but not only younger people, concerning the so-called mainstream media. But I think sometimes this distrust is justified, and sometimes I would also say we can be proud of what we have done in the past, and that we were able to hold governments to account. And I also would even say, go further and say, it is of course important that we play our role also when we receive information from whistleblowers to do these checks, to verify, is that true, is that relevant, because that's where we have our reputation for also, and this is something one cannot simply forget. I remember once also in late 2009, early 2010, at a cooperation with WikiLeaks, and I got some huge trove of documents concerning a big contract, millions of euros worth between the German government and some consortium of companies, and WikiLeaks couldn't tell me whether these documents were authentic. So I had to do these checks, because there was no contact to the source. So I had to do the checks myself for a month to check, are these documents authentic? And after quite some work, I could say, yes, I was there then confident these documents were not a fake, and they were not a fake indeed. But indeed, this work had to be done, and that's a journalistic work, and that's what we have learned, and we have the skills, and therefore I think we have an important role to play also in this way.
And we still can. Okay, Garrett, you wanted to
I was just going to say that so far we've been talking a lot about whistleblowers and journalists, and one of the awesome things that I've taken away from today, talking to everybody who's been here, is that while journalists and whistleblowers often go together very well, there are also many other types of organizations, NGOs, nonprofits, et cetera, and so forth, who do really important work with whistleblowers. Just wanted to throw that out there, that we are not forgetting about you guys.
Yeah. Well, but that was my question, because question one, can we trust the government? But can we trust the press with their role of controlling government, and press is diversifying, if you will. There are more players getting into the journalistic arena. So can we trust the press at this moment? Are you happy enough as a civilian?
Well, I'm not in a position to discuss that. Yeah, I would think so. I would hope that people still trust us. And by and large, from our own organization, there is still a measure of trust among the French-speaking public. But to come back to your first question, yes, and to bring the focus again on the Snowden story, 3 weeks ago at Le Monde we had a panel just like this one, in a room except the seats are better there, but. And
I told him to try it in a dress.
We should all try it in a dress.
Let's all try it in a dress. Yeah.
And we invited Glenn Greenwald was there because he was promoting his new book, No Place to Hide. And we also invited 3 French officials to discuss things with him: a judge, acting judge, former foreign minister, and a former head of the counterintelligence. And the counterintelligence guy said this, it was pointless because everything we do by definition is illegal, and so it's against the laws of the Republic, and that's why we call ourselves Secret Service. And so there is no point in this discussion. Either France as a country decides to not have any counterintelligence or intelligence services, and we could, a unilateral disarmament. It can be dangerous, especially seen from his standpoint, of course. Or you accept the fact that we're going to break the laws of the Republic.
Okay. Right. Running through the questions, what's the most significant change that we saw from the situation prior to Snowden and after? Alison, would you like to reflect on that?
Sure.
If you can name one sort of really significant change.
Well, because I was remiss in answering your earlier question about what GAP does, one thing I forgot to say is, of course, we have a strong legislative presence on Capitol Hill. And in the 37 years of GAP's history, we've been involved in pretty much every piece of federal legislation in many states that has been passed. So to answer your question, I think one of the most significant changes from the legislative perspective is that Snowden's disclosures and the public reaction to it really reignited the push to get, particularly intelligence community workers, covered by whistleblower laws. Because when the Whistleblower Enhancement and Protection Act was passed in December of 2012, intelligence community whistleblowers are intentionally carved out of that. And Snowden states that fact, if you've listened to some of his more recent public talks, is one of the reasons that he went to Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. So his disclosures have really reignited this push for meaningful protections for intelligence community whistleblowers, which I think is very important. And there's a bipartisan Senate coalition that's working to do that. So I would say in the legislative front, I think that's one important.
Okay. Anyone else has a reflection on very significant change from the...
I'd say one thing is important because Edward Snowden took this extremely courageous decision to go public about him being the source. I mean, we all remember perhaps when we saw this video there this evening when The Guardian put it online, which was made in this hotel room in Hong Kong, where he showed a face to the revelations which had been public before. And then we saw, this is no freak, no weirdo, but it's what was he then, 29 years old, concerned Democrat, concerned citizen, who was there naming himself as the man behind the relations about the NSA. And this, of course, I think did some very important service to the concept of whistleblowing as such, because I think in Germany, at least, the word whistleblower was hardly known. We don't even have a German word for whistleblowing, not like Glockenläuter in Dutch you have. And so the very concept of whistleblowing has become more well-known in Germany and certainly also elsewhere. The bad sort of connotation which often goes with people being a snitch or whatever, this somehow might have been compensated by him because he showed that what whistleblowers do can be a very extremely helpful service to society, and that was important.
Okay, thanks. Yves and Gareth, do you have reflections on that question?
Yeah, I think in the technological realm, the changes since Snowden have been extreme. I worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco right before the revelations came out. And we used to have conference calls where we would be talking to people all over the world, and whenever the line would glitch out or something, we'd always joke, haha, it's the NSA listening in on the conversation. And post-Snowden, we know that it doesn't matter, they're already listening. Pretty much everybody who had their tinfoil hat on a little bit too tight before has been vindicated 100 times over since Snowden. The craziest, most paranoid conspiracy theorists were being conservative, frankly. And so in the security community, it's been, there was a kind of a phase of almost like nihilism and depression where we were like, wow, we can't trust this or that or that or that or this, or everything is just completely, totally hopeless. And that's kind of past, and I think now the new phase is focusing on going back to basic principles. And in the language community, people are working on designing safe languages. So from the ground up, programs have fewer vulnerabilities that are exploitable. More projects are taking security very seriously, like SecureDrop, Global Leaks very recently, and other projects are all getting audited by independent third parties. So before we give it to people who will risk their lives in the process of using the software, we have people who come in and spend weeks just trying to break it, and then we take their feedback and use it to improve it. And that's becoming more and more of a common thing, which I hope is a trend that will continue. So I think in general, it's been good, but it makes everybody really buckle down and take things very seriously.
Yves, do you have a reflection on this question? Most significant change?
Well, in France, the Snowden revelations didn't make the splash that they did in Germany, for instance. There
was no relation about the mobile phone of François Hollande being tapped, no?
Yeah, well, it's deeper than that. I think I was in Germany 4 times recently just to cover these stories like that, and I was surprised how the German public, the average man in the street, knew about these stories and felt concerned. I remember in the former East Berlin when they talked to me as a foreigner. They said, "Oh, we were so proud to live in a country where mass surveillance was not possible anymore," because we knew that from the Stasi, and now we discover that it is possible, that it's being done. So there was a real outrage. That I have to say, I haven't found that in France to the same degree. More in the elite, the intellectuals, but not so much in the general population. And actually, recently, France just passed a new law. Part of the defense budget that makes mass surveillance in France by the French authorities much easier than it used to, and that's a recent law. And it went almost unnoticed. Only newspapers like Le Monde and things talked about it, but not so much. And most people, when only like the hardcore activists and militants were up in arms against that, but they didn't get any response. So. I'm not sure, the Snowden thing has had such a big impact on the French population, but it has on the intelligence community. They thought they knew everything, and they didn't. In particular, they totally underestimated the Five Eyes thing from a French perspective. Well, that's what they're telling me. I don't know if it's true or not, but they're telling me, they say we knew everything. Because they are partners with the NSA, so we accept that. They say that's the one thing that shocked us. We didn't realize that when we gave something to the British, they would give it automatically, immediately to the United States. So that's one thing that surprised them, or that surprised the ones we were I was talking to. But again, these are like off the record talks, no names, nothing. So I don't know how true it is, but I heard it from several different sources that it made the French intelligence community have a different look at the United Kingdom.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. I'd like to come to a conclusion on this phase. Are there any questions about? Go ahead. I have a second. No, I'll use this.
Whistleblowers go preferably not to the mainstream media, but go to sites or something. Mm-hmm. But in France, Mediapart, I think it's a former colleague that has started that, and I think
they're all from Le Monde. We know them well. Yeah,
and all the disclosures nowadays are for the first done by Mediapart, and then the other media like Le Figaro, Le Monde lag behind. Am I right? And how come?
They've been very successful at this, but traditionally in France, the newspaper which had the most whistleblowers go to them was Le Canard Enchaîné, but it's old school, old style. I was thinking more, trying to again narrow it down to things that I know, like all these guys. Like it's true that WikiLeaks and they have people like Snowden, people like Glenn Greenwald. They have a double agenda. One is to expose the abuses by the government, but the other agenda is to try expose the weakness of the big media and try to push for reform in the big media. Actually, WikiLeaks at first saw itself as a new media, which was going to compete with the old media, outperform the old media, and maybe eventually bury them. So it's only when he realized that Julian Assange, this is me reconstructing things, it's not, that's not what we never talked about that, but that's what I perceived, At first it was like a new media which was compete with the old media. Then he recognized that they didn't have the brand name yet, so he didn't get the traffic that he wanted, that he hoped for. And so he decided to go to the established media and strike agreements with them and partnerships, so he could exist on a worldwide scale, which he did. But at first, that was not the idea was that he was going alone. And
okay. Well, thanks. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Let me. There's another question from this gentleman.
I have two questions. The first question is, what can you say about the problem that the government or a lawyer can put a side down with sensitive information or information that that is harmful for organization. That's my first question. Put the site down, banning a site from the international, and then I got into this problem years ago, but then I host my site in America.
Yeah, in what country was that?
In Holland. I have my own site, criticalpodium.com, and I publish very sensitive things about my research about right-wing extremism, racism, apartheid, white supremacy, and also Hinduistic views. And the second question of me is that what must the writer do if he published a book like this one, Quran Forbidden Rewrite, my book, and nobody want to touch it, Reviews were refused, and as I am alone and the self-published work, but it is very sensitive.
Okay, so your question twofold is one, what's the view on governments blocking websites? And the other one is how, as a lone wolf whistleblower, can you get this type of sensitive information into the public spheres? Hans-Martin, would you like to reflect?
Okay, I can't really tell much about this specific case. Actually, at least in the Western world, it is not so easy for governments to take sites down. Of course, there are libel laws all over the Western countries as well, where you can then be the victim of when someone goes to court against you. But of course, to answer the second question, of course it might be sometimes difficult for individual whistleblowers to get their story through. There have been cases in the past, and it's true, of course, that media have their criteria for a story which seems sexy enough to be published, and some other stories might be still important but don't get through this filter. That's a problem which might even increase when at least the traditional media have to fight some rearguard fight in order to survive. That's true.
Okay, because that basically boils down to the last question. Because what struck me in Greenwald's book is that Snowden, of course, approached him several times. It took a couple of months, right? And then he didn't respond.
Greenwald didn't use encryption, and
exactly.
And Snowden was astonished and even shocked that Greenwald didn't have any encryption programs in place in order to communicate with him. That was a problem.
But basically, there was this guy with this information reaching out to a journalist who basically didn't respond. Alison, what's your view on that? Because Anna Myers this morning said one of the biggest reasons for whistleblowers to not whistleblow is that they feel that nothing will happen anyway. So here I risk my life, I put my life on the line, and journalists don't care. Or what's your view on that weird situation where Greenwald does not respond to Snowden in the first instance?
Well, I think as a journalist, I'm sure he probably has. Or probably has a lot more now, individuals coming to him all the time saying that they have, documents that are going to knock your socks off and, this will be a great story for you. I can imagine before the disclosure. So, in a sense, he was taking certain precautions and he was not encrypting, as I understand it, in the way that Snowden understood that he needed to. And I believe if he went to Laura Poitras then and said, can you help me with this? So, there's a certain amount of professional discretion that he was using. But in terms of, whistleblowers going to the media, I think that, at least at GAP, it's one mechanism by which a whistleblowing story can be brought to the public's attention. It's one way of raising the public alarm and pointing out the public interest aspect of a story.
But do you feel that the media are responsive enough to whistleblowers?
It depends on which media. You can't really talk about a media. One important aspect of the Greenwald-Snowden case is, and one thing that's changed I think radically in the aftermath of the disclosures, is you saw, at least in the United States, the media becoming, the mainstream media becoming the megaphone for the government, repeating the slanders that are normally first raised against a whistleblower. I mean, we saw the pattern repeat itself. The disclosures came forward and the smearing began. The focus was on the fact that that Snowden was a high school dropout, that he washed out of the military, that, you know, something about his girlfriend. Everything to focus on perceived shortcomings of the individual whistleblower, to refocus away from the nature of the actual disclosures. And the mainstream media jumped in on the government's behalf to a large degree. But what we also saw, which is even more alarming, was journalists in the United States attacking Greenwald and even calling for his prosecution.
Even shooting him, isn't it?
Well,
oh no, it was a senator or something.
Yeah, that
who
was a
suggested to
senator,
shoot him.
which-
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, you see this pattern, but when you see the media itself attacking one of its own, essentially on behalf of the government, I mean, that's an alarming trend coming in the wake of the fact that, you know, journalists like James Risen are on the verge of going to prison. The AP scandal last year where, you know, data, phone calls, emails were collected wholesale from the Associated Press, you know, in a sort of secret surveillance operation, again, before the disclosures. So we have to look at this as a much larger trend that's an attack on the media as well as an attack on whistleblowers.
Okay, just to finalize, just out of curiosity, Garrett, you work, SecureDrop is developed for media companies, but you suggested that you're also working with other types of media
That's right.
outlets, if you will.
Right. So all leak platforms have a common initial problem where they want people to submit leaks to them. But in order for anybody to do that, to be that crazy, they want to trust them, so they want them to have a reputation. But to have a reputation, you have to have received some leaks and then publish them, and then it's a catch-22. So our idea was to partner with existing, as you said before, brands, organizations that have an audience, a reputation, and know how to handle the documents, and then just give them a tool and hope that they find it useful. But we don't only work with journalists, we also work with like Pogo, which is a nonprofit government watchdog based in DC, and several other groups. ProPublica is one in New York City. Okay. So it's not just journalists.
Okay, all right. Let's round this up. There's one more question on this, and then we'll go to the next slide. Sir, you. I'll hold the microphone. Thanks.
Actually, I've got two questions. One concerning SecureDrops. Could you describe the difference between the different leaking platforms? I don't know if you know the SiteOne in Germany, Global Leaks, and SecureDrops. And then to the journalists, do we really want that? I mean, I want to live in a representative democracy where the state does its job. And I don't want to have a need to read newspapers and to read alerts and to act on these alerts. And if I won't act on these alerts, it's only the newspaper selling its story and the world doesn't change either. So for a whistleblower wants a change in the real world, and that's not provided by having a newspaper selling its paper. And it's not provided by having a leaking platform increasing the number of documents available on the platform. So how do we get the real impact the whistleblower is striving for? And is there any statistics about that? And what can be done to increase that? Or do we really need to reconquer the state?
Well, revolution started in Amsterdam on June 18th.
I think we should just reconquer the state, and then I knock the mic over, and then I walk off. Quickly, the difference between the leaking platforms. I don't know about SiteOne, and I am sorry about that. In terms of global leaks versus SecureDrop, which I don't want to phrase it that way because they're complementary. But
let's keep it short. But it's an interesting question.
Yeah, the basic idea is that SecureDrop was basically designed with a very specific, very high severity threat model in mind. So we're talking about basically Snowden level, like NSA type adversary or around that level. And so it's very strict about what how sources interact with it, how journalists interact with it. It's very kind of like difficult to use in that way. It's very high security. Global Leaks was designed to be easier to use, more usable, and in a broader range of environments. So the focus is more about where can leaking be useful? Are all leaks, do they have to be as high impact as Snowden? Can they be? Yes. Yes.
Fabio, would you care to, do you agree with Garrett? Okay. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next slide for time's sake. I'm sorry? The second question.
Oh, for the journalists.
You're correct.
Revolution.
So do we need this? Do we want, I don't know if, yeah, the answer is yes. Le Monde doesn't have something like that right now. But I came here to Amsterdam like 2 months ago specifically to talk to Teun and people who set up the pub leaks, and I also talked to the people from Milan, the Global Leaks, and then I wrote an article about it in Le Monde, and then I tried to push it, push the idea with Le Monde's management, and I'm not getting anywhere yet, but I'm sure I will soon, and yes, I think we need this. Again, I'm not trying to see the big picture. I think there's this tendency, which is, I think, regrettable in some media, to always want to take the moral high ground and see and do good for everybody. No, well, let's do our job, our lowly job, which is to get the truth out. Period. And so things like that, I believe, Teun's idea was a great idea, and we're going to imitate him if we can.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. Yeah, I have one final question.
Actually, a reply to part of this gentleman's question on the Zeit platform. I helped work on the implementation of Publics, and we've assessed the Zeit platform, and I would keep away from it in terms of security. As to your other question, I think a place in this network for these leaking platforms is also because we see budgets for investigative journalism that are rapidly dropping because nobody wants to pay for stuff anymore on the internet. So we have to come up with other modes of jump-starting journalism and jump-starting this kind of investigations and getting stories out and helping journalists do their work. So I think there's a definite need for this kind of platforms. Yes.
Thanks. I'd like to end this now, if you don't mind terribly, and go to questions regarding the current status. And one of the first question I put up is, how do authorities respond to what happened? And actually, is Peter still in the? We have one person. He's a member of Parliament, and he was in a session this afternoon. Peter, could you reflect on what you've experienced being very close to the center of power in terms of responses to what happened with Snowden? Were they scared? Were they confused?
Who is they?
The powers that be, the government, the state.
The powers that be. That's a very anonymous state. It's a mixture. On the one hand, it's very threatening. More openness is very threatening. If you ever see the English, what's it called? The comedy series about Yes Minister. The first is the big thing. You want open government as long as you're not in government. And the moment you're in government, you don't like open government. And you will explain how that works. So there is a real fear of open government on top of that, and especially in something sensitive as national security. So what immediately started with Snowden was to actually make sure he was not a whistleblower but a leaker. He was, his character was being tainted, like they do with most whistleblowers. And when I tried to organize the hearing, that I can't actually quote from a closed meeting, but let me tell.
Why not?
There wasn't a wave among the MPs that were present over there.
We can set up a Global Leaks.
Sorry?
We can set up a Global Leaks for you to report to.
No, well, yeah, you send them to me. But I mean, yeah, there was a fear, and there's been all sorts of, even in the public meetings, they were saying we don't want to qualify him as a whistleblower, so we don't want him in the research. there is a genuine fear that governments get more open because most politicians have got something to hide. And that was the whole process that's still going on. And so, whereas publicly one of the main objectives of my hearing could be to get information, that's obviously a quite useless thing to do because we're listening to him, it's public, and I'm not as much an expert as you are. What I'm really doing is to give him some credibility. That the whole process that's being done there is making sure he gets in Russia, gets into stupid places and gets stuck. And what I'm doing is to make sure he talks in a public hearing to 40 MPs and in a full room, and I mean, so that you can't call him completely out of the real world. So that's at least what we achieved 2 months ago.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to have that intersection. Hans-Martin, what was your view? What was interesting is that in Germany it was not such a big thing until the moment that it turned out Mrs. Merkel was being eavesdropped.
No, I was joking. I mean, it's true that it was quite a big story already before. He was right, and perhaps bigger than in France, perhaps bigger than in Britain, where the papers were mostly very hostile towards the Guardian's revelations, and that's partly true because Spiegel, one big German magazine, not mine, but another one, they were also from the beginning receiving documents from Snowden's files, and that helped. But certainly it's true that in Germany, sensitivity towards questions of privacy, data protection is higher for reasons of our not so happy past. And this might explain it a bit. On the other hand, you might also have heard that although the German public was very concerned, also the government then paid lip service to these concerns and raised the issue with the US government and President Obama. They still were then, for a while they were trying to get a sort of no-spy agreement between Germany and the US, where the US would then refrain from spying on German citizens on German territory. And after a while, it was clear the US government wouldn't give any such, wouldn't agree to any such an agreement, and it was simply that they promised they wouldn't tap Mrs. Merkel anymore for the rest of the population.
One German citizen was
exactly
clear.
For the other 80 million, they were a bit less clear in their proposals. So, and the German government then also backed away from this from the
agreement.
Agreement, and doesn't pursue this anymore because it's more important for them to have good relationships with the US government than to risk a war. Also, the question were recently discussed whether Edward Snowden should be invited to Germany to give testimony to the parliament in the framework of a recent inquiry committee which has been set up, and the government also is strongly against inviting Snowden, not because they fear they have to extradite him, but also because they say this might be against the law and this might cause then harm with the US and so forth and so forth.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Alison, what's your view on how the authorities responded in America? Was it a big scare? Was it a big sort of structural?
In essence, I would sort of repeat the answer I already gave in terms of what happened was initially the usual smear campaign, attacking him personally.
But I'm more fascinated. What Yves said is that the Secret Service in France was surprised by certain information. So I'm more looking at the internal response of the authorities.
Right. Yeah. And to move on from that, I think initially that they were caught off guard, clearly, because just weeks before, of course, James Clapper had lied to Congress and wanting to represent a very different worldview. So I think that in trying to do damage control, they did a couple things. They did the normal smear tactics, but then internally, Obama called for this dialogue that he says that he wants to have with the public. And it's very interesting because as a result of that, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board that he set up came out and essentially said that, yes, the NSA has overreached. Yes, it's really not acceptable for us to be, spying on literally the entire world just because we can. It just so happened that around that same time, a federal court ruled that, again, the NSA was overreach, and the judge who wrote the opinion even referred to what the NSA is doing as Orwellian. So Obama's getting the dialogue that he says he wants. What it hasn't resulted in yet, though, is real reform and a real stepping back from the mass collection of data. I mean, what he's talking about now is not stopping to collect it, but just having it stored and held somewhere else, which is obviously, not acceptable.
Just for a rainy day.
I'm sorry?
Just for a rainy day, just to have the data.
Yeah, right, just in case we need it. I mean, so it's almost a circular sort of argument when you get down to it, because they're not prepared to give up what they already have, I think, until and unless the public forces them to. And, when you're working with whistleblowers at Gap, even before Snowden, what whistleblowers say they want, and I think this point was made earlier, their biggest fear often is not retaliation or losing their job. It's that nothing will happen as a result of the disclosures. And that's one of the first things that Edward Snowden said in that first interview that was broadcast June 5th, 2013, is that my biggest fear is that nothing will change. And while change has only happened in part, what has changed, I think, is the reputation of whistleblowers, that whistleblowers now have a role in society that is positive, and that's the general view. The deeper systemic changes that really need to take place are in their infancy, but at least we're having the discussion.
Okay. Because basically, again, you referred to it as well, you can say that the authorities will have been vitalized by what happened, like struck up and say, well, we need to reconfigure and so forth. The technology department and the hacking community have also been vitalized. I mean, it's much more prominent as anything. So you could say there's a battle going on, right? An arms race, if you will. Mm-hmm. That was the second question. Who's winning? Who is winning?
That's the football match.
Not who will win, but who's winning now.
It's no football match where I can clearly say who scores a goal or not, I think.
No, I know, but
but for the time being, the NSA has not been stopped. This is going on as we speak. So, in spite of all the media attention and the public outrage and everything, it's an ongoing program.
But I'm sure it has even intensified. I'm sure they
will
have
another thing which happened, like in France, because I know it, but I'm sure in the United States as well. They said, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. So they go back to their system and they make them much more secure, exactly. And they give the top clearances to far fewer people. So in the next whistleblower, it'll be much harder for him technically, and also there's fewer people who have the clearance in the first place, so it might be easier to identify, or it might not even happen.
And the French government introduces new legislation that even strengthens their capacity to eavesdrop, as you just said.
Yeah, well, that makes it easier for the French state to perform mass surveillance in the whole areas in case of national emergency and things like that. But you know what it's like. First, it's written in the law. It's only for national emergency, so you think wars and things. But then, national emergency is hard to define. So the next government can decide that something that we think as a small event will become a national emergency, and they can trigger this new legislation and do mass surveillance of the whole town or a whole neighborhood.
Yeah, Garrett, you want to reflect on it?
I'm not sure if I would say that either the state or the public is winning, but I would say the public is putting up one hell of a fight.
Really?
I think so. In the technical community, in people in this conference, there is a lot of action going on. Just for me to see all these new leak sites pop up, it's pretty cool to see that people are really involved with this and are adapting it to all these different environments. It depends on what your end goal is and how you define, as we've discussed, the state. But I think that there's some good resistance brewing.
Okay. Okay, and then Hans-Martin, do you think Snowden has inspired whistleblowers or turned them off?
I mean, as I said before, I think, of course, like that he has inspired people. I mean, he sort of made the sort of role of whistleblower something which is sort of something one can aspire to. But of course, in the same time, it is also true that he has shown what is the downside. I mean, he is now trapped in Moscow. He can't travel to the US without fear being like sentenced to prison. He cannot even travel to Holland or Germany, I suppose, because he then would be extradited by either of our governments. And so, of course, he has paid a hell of a price for what he has done. And so if he inspires whistleblowers, they will certainly think twice how they protect also their identity and whether they really will want to go public like he has done it, like courageously.
Okay. Yves, do you have a reflection on that question?
No, I'm good. I just
okay.
I talk too much.
Okay.
No,
you don't do too much. Anyone else? A reflection on that question specifically?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to chime in a bit on that one. I think that what Edward Snowden has shown us is that it is possible for one person to step up and to make a difference. But I also think that it shows potential future whistleblowers that you also have to have a carefully thought out strategic plan to do what you're going to do. Part of that plan in some cases involves technology. Part of that plan in some cases involves journalists. But an also very important component and part of that plan is to have a strong civil society organization that you can work with, whether it's a GAP, whether it's an ACLU, whether it's a Whistleblowing International Network. Because the technology will encrypt or protect the data, but there's a human being behind that data. And who is going to walk with that human being after the dust settles, after the headlines recede, which they inevitably do in the 24/7 news cycle? It's organizations like those. I like to say organizations like GAP and WIN, we're the Tor for the human whistleblower. We're PGP for that human whistleblower. Wow, I got an applause.
Well,
Thanks. Thanks. Questions. Let me, well, Leon, maybe I can start with you. Sorry.
Well, one of the things, maybe slightly off topic, but not entirely, and I fully condone what you're saying about how we need to protect the human factor behind all this. At the same time, I think one of the problems is that both politicians and the general public don't really understand the vast amount to which dangers they are exposed. And one of the things that I find very interesting is that in these whistleblowing, I'm putting up as a question, in these whistleblowing discussions, we always seem to focus on governments. However, large proportions of data are owned, and the internet globally is owned by corporations over which we do not have any accountability mechanism. That's one. The second is that the Snowden revelations showed that the public infrastructure of the internet, if you can call it that, is kept deliberately unsafe for intelligence community people to exploit it. And that leads to leaks in a vast array of things that impact on the public, even in the domain of banking fraud and all sorts of things. And I don't understand why we are also not questioning our politicians. How can we fix the technical quality of the internet? How we can increase the safety of that public infrastructure on which we depend, and why don't we tax corporations in order to do that? Because I agree with you that there's a growing community of people that are active in this fight. However, they're all underfunded. They're all working with limited resources. And I know that, you know, for most of the good people that are here, this goes for everyone. Everybody's putting a lot of hours in it. But the fact of the matter stays, and that goes for journalists as well. Most of the investigative journalists do it offline in their own time while they're earning their money in a different job. And this is a problem why we cannot win this fight.
So your question is, why can't we get our politicians to have us all help fix the internet?
And also about why are we focusing on the government as opposed to other things that surveil us. That's actually, so one of my favorite stories that came from a Snowden disclosure was about how the NSA uses the Google Pref cookie to track users. So Google is a big internet company that also advertises. That's how it makes most of its money. And there are many other third-party trackers that track what you do all over the internet on every web page that you visit to build profiles of your behavior in order to target advertisements to you. It's actually kind of sad. The greatest minds of my generation are devoted to selling ads online. But what's crazy about it in the context of surveillance is that they're doing all of this work, all this sophisticated work, to build a profile, basically to reproduce your browser history on their own servers. And so what the NSA does is they track the cookies that they set on all the requests that they make, and they use that to track users online. So they basically don't have to invest much effort in tracking you because Google is doing it for them. And these companies are doing it for them, and they can simply piggyback off of it. Now, there are things you can do to make that impossible. You can encrypt all internet traffic, and that will make that a lot harder for them. But it doesn't address the fundamental problem that you brought up, which is that we have more and more corporations that are giving us beautiful, shiny things like free email and calendars and integration with all these things. And the price we're paying is literally everything that we do on the internet, without even really realizing it sometimes. So that's a fundamental question that isn't quite on topic here, but is very related and very important. In terms of the NSA undermining the internet, that's another very serious problem that people like Bruce Schneier have addressed in depth. And it's a thing that they've been trying to do for a long time. We thought they kind of stopped doing it after the first crypto wars in the 90s, but they've been doing it just more secretly since then. It's a huge problem. It's incredibly, there's an incredible amount of hubris in thinking that the NSA is the only thing that can use the exploits that they leave behind in all of this hardware and all of this software. It endangers all of us and endangers the basic trust that enables us to use the internet for commerce and for communication and for to make it the resource that it is today for everyone around the world. I think that all we can do is use open source and go back to basics and build systems that don't rely on corporations that are in bed with the NSA and don't rely on hardware that has been backdoored by them.
Well, that's a long way off. So.
May I add just something? Sure. I mean, that's concerning our actors in the government. It's also true that there are new dangers coming up. Like I was just doing some investigation on the car industry and the lobbying activities in Germany concerning future cars or even just modern cars, which collect an enormous amount of data nowadays, and nobody knows what is collected there, what is going to be then uploaded by the companies, who has then access to this data. Nowadays, then, if you buy a car today, you don't know who can track then all your movements by car, simply because it's storing either via GPS where you're driving, simply because you use your sat-nav. So, I mean, there are, I think, completely new dangers coming up there. That's absolutely clear.
Okay, there's a question here from this gentleman.
Yeah, it seems to me, it seems to me that the only winners are always the states, not the public. It's the case in history. If you go back in history, you can see that they smashed the printing presses because they were publishing stuff that the state didn't like. We are in exactly the same kind of situation in the modern age. The state will always win. The best that the public can hope for is a very, very gradual change for the better. But that change these days, with the way that the technology works, is unlikely to ever happen. And by the way, about the encryption story, Glenn Greenwald himself said that the problem with encryption is that if you use encryption, then you're immediately flagged because you're an encryption user. The only way we can ever get encryption to be useful to us is if millions of people, not tens of thousands of people, use it all the time for innocuous things as well as serious things.
That's absolutely right, and we should all do that. You can think about using encryption as a form of solidarity. It makes you feel better, but that's how I think about it.
There was an interesting thing with Publix when we launched it, because we understood that if someone goes to a leaking website, he's it's possible to track him, that he's been there. So we've generated little programs from other sites that generate traffic So there's millions of people that have visited Publix in the last few months. So interesting, there's ways around everything if you think about it. Yeah. One of you had a question too. Excuse me. Can I pass by you, Annabelle? I'll go here. No worries.
Mag ik vasthouden? Nee. Okay, I disagree with states versus public because I think states, need the public and public need the states. Only we need more transparency, and that's the real lack and the real problem right here. A great example is Peter Omtzigt. I think he's one of my favorite CDA politicians, but there are also a lot of bad examples like Wim van der Kamp. And I think, if you look at journalism and how they can, help this problem, is like nowadays elections are more marketing. They're like, slogans, really, superficial things. But when politicians have made some decisions in the past, they don't, that doesn't come back sometimes in elections why it should be. A journalist should be more responsible, especially in election time, to show how politicians really make decisions and also take care of lobbyism, because I think that will really solve it. It's not states versus public, it's like change the state so the public is better served.
Well, good point. That comes back to what Leon said as well. What's the role of politicians in this discussion? I mean, we're looking at states and states institutions and so forth. What's the role of politicians?
So let's come back to what
Leon
was saying about the states deliberately weakening the security. It's not getting any better at all. I hate to be like the pessimist in this little. Well, it takes one to. For a debate, but really, for instance, in France there is a company which sells zero-day exploits. I mean, vulnerabilities that were unheard of before, and they sell it to the NSA and they sell it to the French government, and it's overboard. They pay their tax. They're just a regular company, and so I asked the French authorities about that. So, why do you tolerate that? But they said, we don't just tolerate it, we support it. This guy is a patriot. He helps France fight. He gives us the proper weapons to fight in this new cyber warfare. And I said, but he also sells to the NSA. And they said, well, that's great, because then it brings currency into the country. So we support export.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, jobs. That's great. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to round up, if you don't mind. One more. Can I just have one more last question?
Okay, my question is very simple, and it's to the journalists. So, at least in the Netherlands, all the papers that have apps are only iPad and Android. And to me, that kind of says PRISM. And my question is, why are there no HTML5 apps for any of these news platforms? Because ultimately, you're sponsoring your readers and their reading habits to, well, I would say, questionable parties.
Good point. Anyone like to reflect? Garrett?
I don't know. You guys should write some HTML5 apps. I work for Mozilla and I like those. They're cool. Just do it. It's good.
No, it's an interesting point. I mean, one of the instruments would be to not be using that kind of technology.
It's mostly the market. Like, you have to have an iPhone app. You have to have an Android app. Those are the vast majority of users. So I don't blame people for only making those apps. It's a pragmatic decision. You only have so much money to make apps. But I agree that it is problematic.
Okay. All right, thanks. Let's move on for time's sake, if you don't mind. Is it okay to leave your question, or it's very urgent?
He looks urgent.
Okay, we'll have both gentlemen then have one last question.
Well, the interesting thing is that the number of people here were trying to trust politicians. I think if you want to have any success, you should make sure that the internet is not a state enterprise. And and for the people that, like politicians, look at the public inquiry in the Netherlands at the moment about the ICT systems and the government, and you know that the government is not able to run any IT system. So don't worry that the government is not being able to make the specs or whatever, or to make sure that it's going to be completely protected. It has to be private. And please make sure that if you trust your own government, that there are lots of governments you can't trust. If you live in China or you live in Syria, or I can name you about 100 countries where you don't want to be living and trust the government with your internet privacy. So make sure it isn't the government taking it over. That's key to protecting your privacy.
I would like to address this trust, state, market, corporations, this dimension. I think it's really important to see this time dimension. I mean, we are not talking about this before the crisis. So there's the crisis. It is cutting through the line between the journalist and the whistleblower. And on the other hand, we have the digital activism, and the street is hot. So this, I think it is really seriously possible to compare what are we looking at to what happened before the transition from aristocracy, feudalism to capitalism. I mean, we have this crisis underlined by the fundamental changes in the production process, the technology. People are talking about the eclipse of capitalism, the Piketty, Rifkin, the serious arguments are coming about this. And we see a new class both in the capital, in terms of Google, Facebook, challenging the old elite. These are all part of the story. And without seeing this context, it is important to do what are we doing better, good, but it's very relevant.
Interesting. You put it in a much larger historic perspective, if you will. Yeah, thanks. For the sake of time, I'd like to move to the last set of questions, which regard the future. And it's about 11 minutes, I think, that we have left for you all to go celebrate the victory of Holland. Let me see. Can you see the questions? What are the capacities of states unlimited to repress whistleblowing? Someone says yes. Someone said, I think, someone said, if you're fighting with a $50 billion organization, you will always lose. Is that true, Alison?
It's certainly not an even fight. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here, right? Because it's an individual, if we're talking about whistleblowers, against a system. I mean, Keith Alexander has an army of lawyers, and some would say an army, at his disposal, while someone like Edward Snowden has, a pro bono lawyer or two, and underfunded, who was talking about underfunded civil society organizations, to support him. And this has been the case for whistleblowers for a very long time. But I think that the forces, again, of civil society, of journalists who do this kind of work, at least evens out the odds a bit. And I think that, that gives them the fight that Garrett talked about, that they didn't think they were going to have on their hands, I believe. And that's very important. The other thing I would say is that one tremendous advantage that a whistleblower like Snowden has on his side that the government does not is the truth, are the facts. And in this age of technology, I will give credit, it's much harder to hide the facts than it used to be. So that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay. Garrett?
I think the fact that reminded me of is that the NSA spends more money on cryptographers, so those are mathematicians who study codes and encryption, than every university in the world combined. So it is not an even fight, and it is sometimes very discouraging.
And is that defeatable to stay in terms of?
Well, sometimes they release technology that they designed for the public use, like Tor, because it doesn't work unless everyone uses it. So that's kind of beneficial. I think that the first crypto wars was about defining whether or not citizens could have access to strong encryption, whether that was a thing that was allowable by law, right? There were questions of whether you could export algorithms, basic ideas, mathematical ideas from one country to the next. They classified the AES algorithm, the RSA algorithm, as munitions comparable to nuclear weapons, right? And that has been totally changed, and me sending a file from my computer to Fabio's computer in Italy is no longer like an offense comparable to me taking some uranium over to Italy. So we have that, and I think that Snowden said very famously, encryption works. Like, we know that the NSA cannot fundamentally break encryption. They can't factor huge prime numbers. They can't take the discrete log. Like, they can't do that. Math still makes sense. They have the same math that we do, and that's kind of the great eternal promise of crypto anarchy and cypherpunks, is that the state has power that it enforces through violence, but no amount of violence can solve a really hard math problem. So we have that going for us, and that's totally stolen from Julian Assange. So credit where credit is due.
There's also the option for, in some cases, not in every case, but in some cases, to go low-tech and to go off the radar. But technologies don't think in those terms. They always, people like yourself, because you're very competent in computers, you think that you have to fight technology with more technology. But you can also downgrade your systems and go off the grid for some specific stories, like whistleblower stories. And so that works. Like for WikiLeaks, what we did was we created a little LAN like for video games, just one router and 9 computers. They were not connected to anything. And they had no connectivity at all. We made sure they were computers with no, there was no hardwire, of course, but there was no Bluetooth, there was no Wi-Fi, there was nothing at all. And also, we just disabled the USB port, so to make sure that the journalists could not make a copy and work at home, and they hated me for that because they had to be in that room, and it was a windowless room. Then we got a room with a window with just one key, no spare keys, no keys with security guys, never, no keys with with the cleaning crews. We had to clean the rooms ourselves because nobody was inside the room, right. Or we let it to go dirty. That would work as well. And so sometimes to downgrade and to go low tech. That's something that you also have to keep in mind at all times. In certain circumstances, I'm not saying it works every time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically every SecureDrop installation, which is why that's basically what every SecureDrop installation is like, which is why it's so hard to use sometimes.
Okay, there's 3 questions left, and number 3 and 5 are sort of comparable. What changes do you foresee, and what is needed? They're comparable, but they're not the same. So Hans-Martin, for example, could you start with what changes do you foresee, say, in the coming 12 months on this topic?
I mean, I'm not very good in...
Not what you'd like to see, but...
Especially when they concern the future, no, as the famous saying goes. I mean, I would like to add one thing to what Yves just said, like going low-tech even means more. I mean, journalists very often still today, and they will do this also in the future, just meet people like in person. And then you don't need email and you don't need encryption, and you have to pay attention, of course, that you are in a place like where nobody is spying upon you. But of course, this will still happen. This is more important than ever, I think, because technology is important, but also those cases which we have seen with Chelsea Manning and with Snowden it's also about trust between whistleblowers and journalists, when this can be established when you meet personally. So, and then next, the question about whistleblowing is not only the question about technology, it's also about basic laws which lack in Europe and most countries in Germany as well as in Holland. I think Britain is one of the few countries in Europe where whistleblowers are legally allowed to turn to journalists under specific preconditions, but that's hardly allowed anywhere else in Europe. And so we need also basic laws which help to protect whistleblowers beyond the question which kind of encryption you use.
Okay. Okay. Yves, what's your view? What do you foresee happening in the coming 12 months? And if you take the developments that you currently see, where's it going to, in your view? What's going to happen in the field of whistleblowing?
First, there is the general crisis of the media, especially the print press, the printed media where I come from originally, and this might jeopardize everything in terms of budget. So sometimes we're not there yet. Le Monde is still very fortunate. We're still a functioning media. We can go to travel far and for a long time. Last year I traveled around the Arctic Circle, things like that. But even that was
What did you do there? Interview people?
I traveled all around the Arctic Ocean. I took 33 planes, boats, and helicopters. But already half of it was paid for by the Pulitzer Center. Mm-hmm. So we already, even with large media, we already have to find money through like unconventional means and things. So if maybe that will develop, but and maybe hopefully we'll get money from other sources without jeopardizing anything. I don't know if that's possible. But that's a problem. You talk about insensitivity of the journalist. Once they've used a whistleblower and they can like throw him away, it becomes disposable. It's also because we don't have the means to support somebody over the long haul. We don't have the means to follow him. Suddenly, you jump from one story to the next. So 1 minute you're completely immersed in a story and it's your life, and the next minute your editor says, oh, now you do something else. And yes, but that's the nature of the media. So instead of blaming the media, I think you should blame yourselves and say, okay, we have to pay for the news. I'm sorry, I know it's a little loop, okay. But that's if you want the media to be able to make progress, you have to accept the fact that news is not free. It's something that needs to be purchased. In the old days, not so long ago, it was completely normal to go to a newsstand and buy a newspaper. Well, now it should be normal to go to your computer and pay for the news because it costs money, and there is no way out of this. If we don't do that, we will not be able to fulfill our role anymore in society.
Good point. Yep.
But I think I should go.
Yeah.
That's very true, but I think it's also we have to pay attention to not being too conservative, because I think the process of the transformation of the media can't really be stopped. And so we have to find new ways, especially to fund investigative journalism. And there are some few encouraging examples like Mediapart in France. You know it very well, of course, which might also be strong, of course, because in general the media are not as strong in France as they are in northern countries. But still, I mean, I recently had some request from Greenpeace in the UK, who asked me to do some investigation on Gazprom because I had done some stuff on Gazprom in the past, and of course I declined. In the future, and indeed, I might also then be open to NGOs who want me to investigate something. But until now, I'm happy to be working for an independent media. But in the future, indeed, journalists might need to turn to a number of different sources for funds for investigations.
Okay, so we're saying that media need resources to be able to work with whistleblowers, and that's a concern.
Everything. And create better, more secure networks and everything. All that costs money, and throwing the ball back into your side of the court.
Buy newspapers and pay for them. Yeah, Alison, would you reflect on what do you see happening in a couple of months, basically?
A month?
Well, no, 12 months.
In terms of. Well, like I said,
I raised the question to Alison.
Sorry?
No, I posed the question to Alison. Is that okay?
Well, very quickly in the United States, we're all watching very carefully this legislation that's winding its way now through the Senate, because it will give some indication as to, is there really any chance for meaningful reform? But I think in the longer term, just very quickly, because solidarity from the public is at its height because of what's happened over the past year. I think that it's very important for all of us, whether it's journalists working with whistleblowers, civil society, techie types, to become aware of the central role of whistleblowers in accountability. Again, to repeat something I was saying earlier. And that it is also up to the public to step up and to say, this is unacceptable, and to give us to take advantage of the means at our disposal to be able to discern these bogus protections that some governments are trying to push from real, meaningful protections that are in the public interest.
Okay. Gareth, if you can name one thing that is needed for a prosperous future of whistleblowing?
I think the most important thing is probably legal protection for whistleblowers. It's a huge problem in most countries. It's a huge problem in the US. There are almost always exemptions for national security, which is possibly the most important arena for whistleblowing, given the gravity and the nature of abuse in that area. And I think that is, in my mind, one of the biggest things that makes whistleblowing a rare and a very dangerous and risky activity. I think that, people have made the great point that whistleblowing is sort of like an escape hatch, like a release valve. It's the last resort of democracy. That may be true, but it should be accepted and encouraged, if we really believe. I'm still somewhat of an idealist, unfortunately. And I believe that democracies can function properly and they don't need to be patched up with all this duct tape, maybe. So I hope that we can get to a point where that's accepted and respected. And they aren't always character assassinated and driven out of their home country and threatened.
Okay, thanks. And before my last question, are there any questions from the audience?
I want to make one comment. I think that what we are discussing now is in a we have very different levels in the countries. The situations are very different. For example, in my country, Mexico, we cannot figure out how to protect the whistleblowers if we cannot yet protect to the journalists. As you know, many journalists have been killed in Mexico and in many other countries. I mean, we need the support of the countries that have more freedom expression to help us to protect to the journalists and also the whistleblowers. I mean, exist many different levels of repression in the world, and it's sad for me to recognize that even I'm here, I feel really far away from you.
Yeah.
Because our situation is many worse. Very.
No.
Okay, so international cooperation. So I'm going to go to this lady first.
What you were saying about the necessity to protect whistleblowers, I read in the last Express this action, this manifesto that has been signed in France by several personalities, and that an international group of lawyers have declared five lawyers are going to work now for Snowden. And I think that this is an incredible action because it is an initiative that has been taken in France as the Pays des Droits de l'Homme, and I think this could be pursued also in other lands, and especially in the Netherlands. It's also democratically. People from. Democrats.
I understand. So mobilizing the legal community to be working on developing support for whistleblowers. Do you mind if I have other people just because they haven't... One nice thing. Great.
Very short. Great. Look, I have one nice thing here. The evolution of a democracy is something that is also my private research. But I have one idea here. Let's say that we force the politicians to make a democratic law. We can vote a politician out before the end of the time that they are elected, before time. Vote the politician out of the government, by the people. and the people must force the government to make such a law in the book.
Okay, so you're saying there's elections, politicians are elected, but before their term ends, we can already kick them out. Okay, good. Do you mind if I go to two people that haven't spoken, and I'll come back to you? Sorry.
Yeah, I'd just like to second Yves' comment on financing. So my point would be basically, if you're not paying, then you're not the consumer, you're the product. Like on a farm, you're the chicken who is being fed, you feel comfy and everything, but at the end you're going to get slaughtered. So if you're not paying for the news you're reading, you're actually fed news which serves someone else's interest, and the person whose interest is being served is the one who actually pays the bill. So we really get the sort of the business plan back on track so that readers do pay for the content so that it starts to serve the readers again.
Good point. Thanks. Did you have a question, Anna?
Well, I was just going to make a comment to our colleague from Mexico, because I think this is really, really important. Those of us who have worked in our countries for whistleblowing protection for a long time know that it was developed because we saw what the gaps were and what was needed. And I think one of the things that the Whistleblowing International Network has tried to pick up on is that in some countries, as I tried to say this morning, the walk between a whistleblower and an investigative journalist is incredibly short. In our countries, we have other options, and we need to use those, and we need to not lose sight of them, and the journalists are there. But in those other countries where that's a short walk and the journalists themselves are in the firing line, then we need to start perhaps a little bit somewhere else. And we can't just say the law is the answer, although I've been here trying to say it needs to be part of the discussion, and that we who've been doing this work need to be at these discussions with you all because we've been thinking about it. But we need to listen to people in Mexico and in Nigeria and in Malaysia, because we don't have the answers for them, but we understand the modalities of, or how it works when the repression happens, and we understand a bit how the support can happen. And the legal stuff, they can tell us what is needed rather than we telling them what they should do.
Thanks. But the international cooperation, I think, is a big thing to take away. Yeah. Okay, I think there will be the last question.
No, it's a remark concerning the is it an even fight, and it's a bit provocative. I think it's not an even fight. Governments and power misuse don't have a chance, because there will always be whistleblowers, and the harder they push and the more restrictive they get, the more will provoke people to remind themselves about their ethics and the way that the big power they have by thinking on their own and by acting, following their thoughts.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, to finalize, I have one more question for you all four, maybe to round up. Will the situation for whistleblowers improve or deteriorate? Garrett?
I cannot make a prediction about that. I'm afraid it will deteriorate as they continue to do increasingly brazen things in the face of power, but I hope that it will improve.
Okay. Hans-Martin?
I think there's no easy answer, because I think also the examples of Snowden and Manning have shown that thanks to nowadays technology, you can also easier download vast amounts of data which then arrive in the hands of journalists, and that's a progress. So on the other hand, it's right, we have now more surveillance, which also endangers whistleblowers. On the other hand, you have a growing civil society which is fighting against that, and I don't want to be a defeatist. I don't want to declare defeat while I'm still alive.
Okay. Alison?
I think for those whistleblowers who take advantage of the civil society organizations who are there to support them, and who think strategically about their plan for whistleblowing to the extent that they're able to, who think through the consequences, take advantage of the means at their disposal, and when it's appropriate and necessary, working with responsible journalists, their odds are going to be much greater than those who don't.
Okay, thank you.
What will happen? Well, I'm not a visionary. I always poke fun at people who predict the future in my articles, so maybe I'll refrain from doing it.
Really? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of the day, of this evening and of the day. Unless there's very urgent questions from people. Okay. Okay. There's okay. One more thing, and then Fabio.
Well, I want to plea for sustainable journalism. So I want to pay for a paper or a media if I know that the paper is conscious of the weak legal position of the whistleblower. So sustainable journalism that has also attention for the interest of the person that discloses the wrongdoing.
Okay. I'm actually working on a project of having a newspaper being bought by its readers, which is a very interesting concept in this term.
Fabio. Thank you. I wanted just to make a comment regarding an analogy that there is within the transparency ecosystem that's related to the open data movements, where policy advocate for transparency was able to push the government to publish open data. And the geeky guys went working on making the tools to analyze those data. And the journalists create a completely new area of journalism, that's the data journalists. And so there is a workflow with multiple stakeholders, the one that does the policy advocacy, the technicians, the journalists that create new way of doing journalism, and the governments that implement some of the policy and make all of things happening that happened for the open data movements. And it's something that it's likely, I see, maybe it's going to happen with a bit of optimism in the upcoming future, also for the whistleblowing. Now it's only the seed of this kind of environment, but this happened for open data, and it's happening for the open data. Those kind of stakeholder community, the one that we see there, are doing exactly the same kind of process and joining the forces and pushing and making a vibrant community altogether. So I'm very optimistic about the future.
Thanks. Thanks. Okay, that brings us to the end of the evening. I'd like to thank you very, very much for your contribution. Normally we have a bottle of wine, but we've decided, Mika, can you help me, to not give you a bottle of wine, but make a donation to a Tor network. So we will be making donations to buy a couple of nodes in the Tor network on your behalf, if that's okay.
Oh, can we help out too?
Sorry?
Can we help out with donations?
I think we could, yeah. Maybe.
I have to go back to San Francisco and I have way too many euros, so you can have them all.
Well, great. I appreciate that. Thank you. Mika is our chief finance officer in that respect, and we'll add that to the donation. Thank you. Maybe I can also thank the Hermans Foundation, Adviespunt Klokkenluiders, the WIN with Anna, Network Democracy, and Free Press Unlimited for making this day possible and making it happen. Very well done. I think it was really a great day. I thank you all for being here. Maybe we have some time to meet afterwards. And there's two people I'd like to thank. One is Anna. Is Anna still here? Anna of Free Press Unlimited. She did a great job. Anna, well done. Yeah, I know. There's many people that helped you out, but you did a wonderful job. And finally, the person that also came up with the idea and came up with all your names and arranged everything, Mieke van Heeswijk. That's it. Let's have a beer. Thanks.